Thank you all for joining us today for our next IC Talk. As those of you are popping into the conversation, I'm going to handle some housekeeping items for us. If this is the first time you're joining the Society of Professional Journalists International Community, I'm going to tell you a little bit about us. We're a community of journalists that aim to promote press freedom globally. And in the last year, at the beginning of the pandemic, our aim was to connect journalists at a time when it was difficult to do so in person. And we did that with the IC Talk series. Now, more than a year later, we've had numerous guests that have joined us and have since expanded to experts and organizations from all corners of the globe. The format's really simple. The guests and I are going to have a conversation. If you'd like to ask him a question, please do so in the Q&A section, and I will weave them into the conversation. What we'll do is unmute you and you can ask him directly. If you want me to ask the question for you, please make a note of that and I'll be more than happy to do so. If you have any technical questions, please make sure to share that in the chat feature. My co-chair, Dan Kubisky, is going to keep an eye on that for us. And also, if you'd like to type in where you're tuning in from, we'd love to know where you guys are tuning in from. And now for our guest today, we have NASA's Chief Technology and Innovation Officer, Chris Mattman. At JPL, Mattman reports the CIO and Director for IT and manages advanced IT research and open source and technology evaluation and user infusion capabilities. He's also JPL's first principal scientist in the area of data science. He teaches graduate courses at USC in content detection and analysis and in search engine and information retrieval. He has materially contributed to the understanding of the deep web and dark web through the DARPA MEMEX project. His work helped uncover the Panama Papers scandal, which won the Pulitzer Prize in Journalism in 2017, which is why we have him here with us today. So usually, Chris, our question that I usually have for our guests when we first start off is for them to tell me, how did you get into journalism? But I feel as if the more proper question to ask you starting off is, how is it that a NASA scientist got involved in one of the biggest stories in journalism?
So it's a pleasure to be here, with you, Al, and with Dan and with the entire community. So thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting story. For me, it kind of feels natural, but it might not be, natural to everybody. I guess then again, if I was the guy from Billion Dollar Whale, maybe that would have felt natural to me too. And starting a movie studio, I don't know, but yeah, for me, it was sort of kind of 2 decades of my life. Like the first decade, I did a lot of the NASA things. I basically worked on instrument and science data processing for Earth science missions. I was the chief architect. Basically what that meant is whenever there are satellites with instruments on them flying around the Earth or Mars or wherever else, they got to downlink their data somewhere. And when it gets downlinked, it's raw and it's not processed. It's not like images or the things that the public knows how to consume or the media. And so in between that end use case and those raw data are science processing systems. And so I kind of oversaw and helped lead and architect kind of 3 major ones in earth science over kind of my first decade at JPL. And in doing that, I learned all the problems with building software, which is basically, in science, not at like Facebook or, the big companies, but in science, it's, ridiculously underfunded and all the things that you want to do, you get a $2 billion Mars mission or a couple $100 million Earth science mission. They're all the money's in the hardware, and software is the thing at the last mile that you can infinitely, change in their minds. And so that first 10 years in building those systems that had to handle more data and all this stuff, we figured out everything that was wrong, everything that we would have wanted to do better. And so that kind of set the stage for my second decade. And the first 5 of which, and this is how I got involved in the Panama Papers and all this stuff. And the first 5 of which I was basically, hey, I like building databases. Working on hyperspectral remote sensing instruments is cool too, but I like doing computer science stuff. Where do I get money to do that? And so I went into technology program development. I got involved with DARPA and the defense agencies and things like that because they had dollars to spend on basically computer science and big data initiatives. The 2012 Obama administration had a big data initiative, and they were, one of the agencies that stepped up to fund hundreds of millions of dollars in software was DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So I got involved in that. I had a lot of great requirements from NASA about how to handle better, more volumes of information, how to process it better. And using that and those requirements, basically got involved in a couple of programs, one called XData, and that was all about building like processing and analytics software, everything from looking at like Bitcoin to entire maps of the internet to, bad guys or gals in a desert. And that heterogeneous data and all of that led us to create technologies that could manage, process, and basically deal with that type of information. And so one of those technologies that I created was something called TICA. And that particular technology, and I apologize for the long answer, I'll shut up. But that particular technology, we like to call it the digital Babel fish. Basically, if you're familiar with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Babel fish is something you put to your ear to understand any language. TICA was a technology that we created to understand any file type, and so you get a file like, think about the 0 dark 30 or things like that. You get a tranche of computers, you get a tranche of things, and it's just it's terabytes of data, lots of different files. What TICA does is it automatically figures out what the type of those files are, because once you know the type, you can extract information from them, text, metadata, whatever, put it into a search engine. And then, to get that information, out and organize it, TICA helps you do all that. And that's why it's the digital Babel fish. That's why we call it. So that technology was created on those programs. It was enhanced significantly on those programs on XData and MEMX. And the long story short is that one of the things it was used for that we figured out later was by the IC4J, who were basically analyzing the leaked data from Monseca, which was the source of the Panama Papers.
So what was one of the major obstacles in this whole process? Like, I can imagine putting software together and making sure that it's the right fit for the problem at hand. Like, when did you get involved? Like, what year was that? And how long did it take to sort through all that? Is that like, I don't have the technological background like you do. So I wonder, was it necessary? Like, how were you able to get through all of that?
Yeah, I mean, so, without that first 10 years of figuring out, okay, data volumes are bigger. So we're going to need to automatically process data, without human in the loop review, which was the traditional way that it was done before, but just, in science, this was happening, but it was also happening in the real world. So the big thing in science in sort of the mid 2000s was okay, after 40 years of collecting all planetary data, the size of the archive was only 4 terabytes, which you could imagine is 2 of your hard drives nowadays. So after 40 years, it was only that. But then in 2006, there was a mission called MRO, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, that had a 12 gigapixel camera on it to image Mars like never before. That was indicative of okay, in 2 years of collecting data from MRO, they will eclipse the size of the planetary archive by 50-fold. They were going to suddenly have 200 terabytes of data. But, that's in science. The other thing that was happening is an iPhone was being invented, and it was getting better constantly every couple of years. And so it wasn't just science. Every sensor, you were becoming a sensor. Humans, journalists, everyone was becoming a sensor. And so, rapid, automatic data organization and triage was something that we were seeing, in science, but also in defense and things like that, because, not only were, these sensors sort of happening and more information out there that you have to organize, but people were using it in nefarious ways. And so here's a linkage is in the Department of Defense, when I got involved in that, and with DARPA, one of the programs, that started eventually was something called MEMX. And it kind of combined two things that were happening, and it wanted to kind of address them. The first was we realized on the XData program that cryptocurrency was becoming something that was super important, which was anonymized, decentralized monetary transactions. And, the original sources or the original use cases for that were, I'd say altruistic and the right thing. It was so that, people worry and countries worry sometimes when nation states can freeze your money, because it's subject to political will and things like that. And so the offering of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and things like that is there's no central bank or whatever, that you're not subject to that. So while that's an altruistic thing, what they found is that always people find bad uses for that. So a lot of the criminal terror networks, in Afghanistan and other places, they were using cryptocurrency to basically do transactions that actually had to do with the early stages. And this was before like every subway or every bus station included a, image of a woman with, straps around her wrists, to indicate human trafficking, which is now prominent nowadays. But in 2012, it was happening afar and abroad. And, ISIS, things like that, they were using human trafficking, and they were doing that and engaging in it, but they were using cryptocurrency to pay for it. So MEMX, the whole goal of that program was, could the Department of Defense take these capabilities and technologies, open source things that were happening at NASA, but also in commercial industry and academia, put them together in such a way that we could basically, provide law enforcement and other, defense and intel operations a way to thwart what was happening on the public internet and both the deep and the dark web, which is basically human trafficking. They were using in between 2012, 2014, and then eventually onwards, even today, they were using sites like Backpage, Craigslist, things like that, where people were engaging in,
right,
normal business to do bad business, like to do human trafficking, to sell guns and illegal weapons, to sell hitmen and to kill people, all that. And so they had no capability to kind of automatically analyze all that. And so they saw an opportunity, with the technology that we were creating to say automatically source and analyze NASA data and science data, to do the same thing in the context of law enforcement, sort through that data, do bulk analysis real quick, get leads, and then, intercept, react, and use that data to basically prosecute people. So the data that we helped collect out of NASA helped prosecute 400 plus criminals and take them off the street from human trafficking. So,
right. And then with the Panama Papers, it was a big collaboration, international collaboration. What was that experience like for you, working along hand with journalists from all different parts of the world? What was that experience like?
Yeah, so for kind of interesting. So we were building out all this open source software, and in particular Tika. And, the way that the open source community works, and even for us, even though I was at NASA, is that there's always this, okay, now when I work on NASA stuff, that's great. I can pull technology in and do it. And it might be open source software. I might buy it from Oracle. I might do whatever. But when you go over and you do open source software, you put on your open source software hat. It's kind of like, when you get the NBA players to play on the US Olympic team, and it doesn't matter that they play for the Lakers or they play for the Knicks, they all play for the USA. And so when we did that, you do open source. When I was developing at Apache and working on that, it was like, we're all Apache people there, okay? And so what happened with us is there was this gentleman, Matthew Karuna Gazinglia, who basically was the guy who was taking Tika, unbeknownst to us, and working with, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. He literally was taking the software that I and others were building, packaging it, and working with those 400 plus journalists on the Panama Papers. And so he was asking us questions. What he did is he took Tika, which is written in Java, no one cares. Anyways, it's a programming language, and Python. And he ported it to a different programming language called Node.js. And so he had a bunch of questions to us when that was happening. And so we saw this guy come on the mailing list, and we helped him, just like when a gal comes or another guy, we help everybody, when they come on the mailing list. And so what we didn't know until we found out, about a year and a half later, is what we were doing is we were helping Matthew get Tika ready to process all that data and basically organize it. So you could find out that Hermione Granger was storing, Emma Watson was storing money in offshore accounts, and the prime minister of, Denmark or wherever, all the people were hiding the money in the offshore accounts. And so we didn't know at the time that we were directly helping those journalists. But then Matthew, as that was revealed, we kind of became friends. And, a couple of other folks, this guy, Tim Allison, and some others who were working in the community, we all became friends, and we all started to, wow, that's what it was for. And,
Wow. Yeah. And so we're sharing with you guys a clip from the Panama Papers, the expose on the ICIJ website. So what is that? I mean, what were some of the obstacles that you guys came across? Were there any obstacles when dealing with, it was over 11 million documents to go through with that project?
Yeah, Elle. So a lot of the questions, a lot of the obstacles and questions are the kind of traditional things, when you work in digital file forensics, which is, there's a file format in here that, Tika's not getting text out of, or, the metadata doesn't make sense. Like, why is it looking at this Word document and then pulling out like different metadata? Or why can't I get a location? Or so one thing to kind of point out is like, okay, Tika has existed since, let's see, I want to say 2007. So it's been sort of my life's work. And so actually I joke around with the people at JPL, like if you don't know, if you don't know or you haven't used Tika, you will if you work for me. And so that's the funny thing. Chris will never let it go. And that's my thing. And that's my hammer for every nail. And so I've been working on it since the search engines community, because this was a key component of a search engine. You can imagine the back end of a search engine, not Google, but the stuff on the back end sorts, organizes, and automatically has to take text and metadata information and put it into an index so that you can find it. And so that's where Tika came from. We pulled that out of really what became the world's largest search engine, open source, technology called Hadoop that we helped to build. We pulled Tika out in a separate project. I didn't only want to work on distributed systems and big processing. I help with that, but my interest is files and ugly data and unstructured data and stuff and managing it, which actually makes me quite useful to journalists like yourself. And, it was like, because you don't want to deal with all that. You want us, I call it the data plumbers to, do all that for you. And so, yeah. So anyways, the typical problems, Elle, are there's a format that Tika doesn't know about. How do we add it? How do we make it automatically recognize that? Oh, once we recognize that format, how do we get the text and the metadata out? Oh, there's some parser library that exists to do it. Incorporate that. It's not done yet. Or, what we did on the Department of Defense projects is that Tika it can support 1,400. So basically all of the primary known types on the internet, Tika can do something with. It can give you some text, some metadata, some information. What we did on Memex is we significantly enhanced it. So instead of just getting blobs of text and some metadata information about the author, the time, and all that, we made it so that you could extract the people, the places, and the things. And this coincided with the advancements in AI, deep learning models and things like that. So you could suddenly take an image and say, oh, I recognize there's a dog in here, or there's like a background in a hotel, or there's like a particular type of light. And that became really useful in the context if you're trying to group, say, a bunch of hotel rooms together in which people are being trafficked so that you can intercept a predator or have a lead and give that to law enforcement and things like that. And that type of processing that uses AI and all that, even though Google and big companies could do things like that, especially today, not so much back then, a little bit, it wasn't in their interest. Google, was approached by the Department of Defense and the other big companies. And they said, that's a really good problem. And, we'd like to help, but it's not going to generate us money, basically, and revenue and clicks. And so that's, and so we kind of stepped in to fill a void there and do that.
So it seems like collaboration is a big key thing here. And being able to, like, for example, for journalists that want to collaborate with data scientists, what do you think would be the best way or form of communication to make a successful collaboration for journalists? Like, what have you noticed after working on the Panama Papers that would maybe make it more helpful for journalists in the future when they want to work on big scale projects like this and kind of decipher all the data and information that comes their way for a story? What recommendations do you have for them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And there's even these hybrid kind of, I would say, not just collaborations, but even disciplines that are emerging, like data journalism. And you see data scientists come at, I teach at USC too, and at Annenberg, the communication school, or even the journalism school there, you see people that actually take data science classes, which is great. I have journalism students sometimes and all of that, which is great. I also like the sports journalism, but we'll save that for another day. But I like, sports and SC and all that. But besides that, a couple of recommendations I have are know the questions that you want to ask that aren't necessarily answered by the data. Some people, they want to walk backwards only from what they think is in there, but you're pre-imposing your bias as a journalist into that. So like have a wide net. What do you think you need for the story, or what do you see kind of emerging? What types of questions you want to ask? Is it based on time, location? Do you need to know people, places, things, networks of them? What's the temporal cadency, with that? Does it matter if it's aggregated at a monthly level because you're looking at big trends or statistics, for the story you're working on? Or is it you really need highly granular, data and things like that? And then, iterate. So the first answers that you get aren't going to be, the answers that you're going to finish with. So don't be afraid as you're iterating to adapt, or even say, gosh, if we could take this other data over here, that I've double clicked on and even just looked at independently and I know is useful, and combine it with the stuff you're already automating, we could, suddenly, I could test my hypotheses. As journalists, you act a lot like scientists in some cases, because you're testing hypotheses and you're actually supposed to let the facts come to you. And I know you all do, the good ones. And, and then you're going to test your hypotheses against those facts. And so don't be afraid to put your science hat on and just say, what are you seeing? What do you need? And what types of questions you want to ask? And then cadence, temporal nature, spatial nature, gosh, if I had this not just in LA, but aggregated at the, county or the higher, those are important questions to answer. And that can inform, how we extract information, how we present it in a way. And then finally, just time, that's the one thing. How long, before is there an urgency for this, or is this a 6 month, thing where it's not, whenever it comes out is when it comes out, and things. So time is an important thing, not just at the level of data, but, how you're trying to get to your story.
For sure. And so what was the lesson that you learned from the Panama Papers?
It really relates in a way, well, to two things. The first thing I'll say is that the cyber environment has changed significantly. And I learned this both on the Panama Papers and also on DARPA Memex. And so one of the things, that wasn't, and I could talk about this a little bit now, it was law enforcement sensitive at the time. None of this is classified or anything, but things I can say is that, at the time we were really worried about tactics and revealing, things that we're doing. It's an arms race, basically, between the bad people and, whatever, the people that are trying to stop them. And so kind of related to that, one thing I learned is about the cyberspace and the cyber domain. And what I learned was, with things like the Silk Road, which we actually contributed to, the takedown, of that on the DARPA Memex project and some of the work we were doing and analyzing it. What was happening on that site? It was a marketplace site on the dark web. It was selling illegal drugs, things like that. And so kind of, related to what Ross Albright was doing, that type of sophistication in that marketplace, levels of sophistication that are increasing are eventual cyber targets. And in that case, the target was actually the government, which, basically took over that site and, basically used it to really collect information so that they can make their case. Very similar in a way to what happened, on the Panama Papers, although, the trajectory of that data I didn't have anything to do with. In other words, this company called Monseca, which was an offshore company that had information about shell accounts and all that, they had a very similar bulletin board marketplace site. And what happened is those types of level of sophistication sites, they're targets, for people to kind of hack them or whatever. And that's what happened to the Monseca people. And that's how the data got leaked. And so that initial thing was the changing threat landscape. So back then, and this was similar also to the Equifax data hack. I was on NBC News and CBS talking about this in 2017. You got punished because you didn't stay up with your patches, and things like that. And so that was the way that attackers, did it is, well, you're not, there's so many patches coming out in software and you're running a site, you don't have it up to date, it's vulnerable.
Right.
The landscape has changed now with the whole SolarWinds thing, because now what I learned about that is, you were actually punished. The companies were punished for staying up to date on their patches, because what they did is that they got into the software supply chain, right? And this is coming out to basically inject some backdoors and bad software. So the people are like, oh, okay, after 2017, we're going to stay up to date on our patches, but now they're getting punished for doing that. So the evolving threat landscape was one thing I learned. And the other thing, well, I guess that was really kind of both things on both ends of that I learned. And then the other is that, and a similar $1 billion whale and all these things is that people, there is a global financial network, and people are going to do things with it, and they continue to do things with it nowadays. And there's probably a lot of journalistic stories there and ongoing, and it's ripe for telling those stories.
For sure. And you mentioned the journalistic stories in this world of, you mentioned cryptocurrencies earlier. And so what is your perspective on what journalists can pay attention to in this new technological wave we're getting into? I feel like everything is so automated. Everything is very, there's AI, machine learning, all these things that are coming our way. And how can journalists kind of navigate through that to find the story from your perspective?
Yeah. So, one thing that I can, kind of lift you up and say you're doing, I see all the time. I see you in rooms like Clubhouse and things like that, Elle. And that's actually a good thing, because in a way you're seeking out, and you and I haven't talked about this, I'm just reading the tea leaves, but you're seeking out that information and kind of where it's at, and you're digesting it and you're making sense of it. So I think too many people are on the periphery, and they read another story or a secondary source as a journalist, and then they try and, fit their hypotheses to the data they're seeing. You actually got to go to the source. And that doesn't mean you have to be an expert in cryptocurrency or NFTs or all, blockchain and all that, but it means that you need to kind of like follow where people are trending. And some of the things you can pull out of that are companies and technologies that are in the space, movers or market movers or technology movers that are important in that, other elements. And actually it has to, when you break all this stuff down, it's funny, in a way. It has to do with money and power, and other things. Like it's funny, art, NFTs and all that. NFTs, non-fungible tokens, they're basically the idea that when you, release art or when you do stuff with art now, you can do it on the blockchain. So you have a digital version of that art, you can auction it, you can, whatever, and it holds some value. And because you use the blockchain technology to put it out to everybody, it's immutable. We have a record of who bought it. There's a distributed ledger. It has all these nice properties. But when you look at some of these things, why are people doing this? Well, I go back to my favorite new book, The $1 Billion Whale one. Why do people put money in art sometimes? Well, sometimes people are doing it to do bad things. They're trying to hide money, and that before cryptocurrency and NFTs, they were just doing it with the Van Goghs. I don't know if you're a Marvel fan, but this came up in Falcon and the Winter Soldier too. It's like, Madripoor, is this fictional place in Marvel where, you meet Sharon Carter, who's suddenly become this underworld kingpin, and she's dealing in the real art, which is actually stored there, and it's the fakes that are in the Louvre and all that. I mean, things like this, right? So, that type of thing.
Right? Now it's like on a blockchain, now we can really track it and see what's going on with it, right?
Bingo. And that's not to paint, the whole swath of people that are there's so many amazing people, you and I see it too in these rooms. There's so many amazing people that are doing great things, with NFT, very, legitimate things. Are they doing it with blockchain and different types of technology? But I just can't help but think in my mind, there's also probably stories there for journalists, for networks of people that are doing not good things. I put my Panama Papers lens on, and things like that. So it has to do with following the story, keeping up with, you don't have to be an expert in technology. You just need to have some topical knowledge. What does it do? If you can write down 10 bullets of what the technology you heard about you think does as a journalist, you're probably okay. You don't need to know distributed hashing algorithms or this or that. Who cares? Blockchain, it's a distributed ledger, it's decentralized, it's the foundation on which some of these verticals like NFT are, great. That's enough. And so my recommendation, to journalists, don't fear the technology people. A lot, some of them are the people you want to hide behind the curtain. Apologies, but they're not going to talk to everybody. There's a lot of people that are good technology communicators. Talk to them and sit in rooms with them, talk to them, get involved in social media or clubs. You'll learn a lot. And then, by the way, your job, and I'm not telling you anything you all know, but you're the storytellers, and you'll, all of that, and much better at that than the tech people.
So we do have a question that came in. Can you rate how some journalism groups have used tech to dig deep into stories? Good and bad, maybe.
I mean, a couple, like, I'm noticing a lot more tech savviness again, especially in some of these hybrid data journalism things or whatever. Like, I mean, the Knight Foundation, there's something called Open Secrets DC. There's, like what is it? It was like open elections, and stuff like that. These are journalistic groups who literally are like on GitHub, taking, and of course I'm self-interest. Remember, my lens, everything Tika, hammer to every nail. These people use my software, and I meet all these people and I'm like, oh God, Anna Masoglia, she's some big person in DC that's researching financial fraud. And you meet all these people that are doing this stuff. And again, they're playing in the space. This is a weasel answer, but I'll get to a rating. I mean, whatever, they get a 10, but all the people they're playing in the technology space. They're not afraid to jump into what GitHub is. Again, you don't need to be a master code configure, check in, check out person, configuration management. They know that if you go to GitHub and you put your work up there, even to have your programmers you're working with, or maybe you yourself, if you're, again, a data journalist and you're not afraid of touching up a little Python. And, Elle, this is a broader comment, on the world today, is like people, many more people are learning, you can learn French, you can learn, Italian, whatever. If you can, and you have time, I recommend to a journalist, learn a programming language, pick one. Python's a good one, whatever and even just
recommend as like a
yeah, totally. And these are things, even to the point where you can double click on these things. There's a notebook, you can have the basic hello world things. Some of the stuff that you guys are doing now that are organizing files or just getting information out has been sort of, made smaller. You don't have to write 1,000 lines of code program. You can make a couple of, calls to some of these libraries, just get the information out and then get it into Excel or get it into wherever you're familiar with, Tableau or, whatever you like, to show data off. And there's been that. But anyways, yeah, there are groups that are doing that actively. And I'm seeing a lot of that. And then even using social media. I see people question farm on social media all the time that are journalists. You don't know, you're looking for something. And sometimes I find people that way, and it's, or they find me, so.
Okay, it looks like we have a question in from David. Let's go ahead and unmute him so he can ask the question to Chris directly. Hey, David. Can you hear us? David, are you there? Did you want to ask your question to Chris? Okay, I think. Okay, if we don't hear from you, I'll go ahead and ask it for you. It says, hi, Chris. As someone who, as you know, contributed a tiny bit to Memex X data, I worry a lot about the actors who I think are the worst actors, quote, bad guys, who are using Tika. The NSA, X Keystroke, FBI, FSB, local police in USA are using those same tools to harass activists like BLM.
Totally, yeah, totally valid question. And anyways, yeah, I was gonna say, if this is the David Mertz, I think I know you. So no, it's great. David's active. He was on the Python board. He's in the Python community, and we were colleagues. This is a valid question. I'll give an analogy. I helped create a technology called Hadoop. Hadoop helped to create a technology called Accumulo. Accumulo was the technology that the NSA used to build their data center in 2013 that was revealed in the Snowden things. It's basically how they collected the phone metadata. I didn't know anything about it, didn't have anything to do with it. But when I found about it, people asked me, oh, Chris, software you build, does this. I never lost a wink of sleep at night, because I know that for every one of those, there's 1,000 people that are, using it for good or in better ways and things like that. And it's hard, like I think about Ian Malcolm, standing on the shoulders of giants with Jurassic Park. You got to ask the ethical questions, and a lot of people are asking them. It's certainly possible people could be using it to do the things you said, or to track activists and things. It definitely makes those types of things easy, the same way they can track financial people doing, bad stuff with crypto or whatever, or shell corporations. It can provide a similar capability with that. And so the thing I would say, kind of related to that, is that even though, again, it might have accelerated, people's ability to not use it for what, you or someone else might call bad, that's certainly something that again, I don't lose a wink of sleep over, because I know that what everyone used it for good. And, and lots of people, and I hope at the end of the day that the use of good outweighs it. I'm pretty confident in that for these types of capabilities, and I don't regret that.
Do you ever worry about security when you're tackling subject matters like this? Because I know in the journalism world, it's huge right now, especially with, attacks on journalists on social media, just in general. There's doxing and there's so many things that, where technology can do good, but also can be a security issue. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, as someone who's been doxxed during Memex, and it wasn't public, but I revealed this in a Clubhouse session recently. I was doxxed. I had 8chan and 4chan post a picture of my house with a call to action to basically come kill me and my family. And, and so basically, all for posting my picture on a website that I was part of an obtuse program called Memex. Right. So, there are ways, literally, including for me at the time, having government people come and watch my house, but again, it's very scary and whatever, but, I think at the end of the day, when they add up pluses and minuses for what I've contributed to or what, we're working on, I think my pluses will outweigh the minuses. And so it's certainly something to worry about. And so my advice too, is that, there's all this big scary tech out there that even Chris might have contributed to that could be used, to do things. There are things you could do. And a lot of journalists know this, is that don't behave in consistent patterns. Use VPN and use, basically anonymize like browsing and things like that. Take precautions. And I see, use mail services that are encrypted and, all of these things. And, so basically my advice is, there are a lot of capabilities for observation and doing that. You should be very, you should know that, that there are the capabilities to track people, be them bad people or, whatever you call bad people, people that, are against the interests of a government or somebody, but also the same could be, as we learned, during the past administration and even in this administration, there are ways to do that with journalists as well. And my advice is, follow the story, believe in yourself, and, speak truth to power, because that's what it's there for on all sides.
We're nearing towards the end of the conversation, the next 10 minutes or so. So if anyone has any questions, please make sure to put that in the Q&A section. Chris, you're also I was listening to one of your conversations about the dark web. I'm wondering if you could touch on that a little bit, because I think the dark web is something that's really fascinating for journalists to be aware of. Obviously, a lot of them are, but how to maneuver that for storytelling. Do you have any recommendations on what to think about when first explain what the dark web is, and then how we can utilize that for our work going forward?
Yeah. So the dark web is another internet that's out there in parallel to the current internet. And the current internet, we call it like the public internet, but also the deep web. The public internet is basically the 3% of the actual internet that you can see just with your browser and things like that, Chrome, Safari, that uses the HTTP protocol and has existed for 20 plus years. And the deep web is the web behind forms, logging into websites, B2B business, the web behind Ajax and JavaScript, which are programming technologies that your browser interprets to show flashy websites like light boxes and scroll bars and all that, that you need a browser to interpret. And then it's the web behind heterogeneous content, images, video, audio that aren't easily processable. So 97% of the web is that. The dark web is completely different. It's a different protocol. It was developed by the Department of Defense. It's called the onion routing, or the onion protocol. It's anonymized traffic. It was meant to be a form of communication. And then it was adapted by the makers of the Tor browser to basically have an internet on top of the onion routing protocol. And so there's a browser that can sit on top of that when you're browsing, it's very, very hard for people, if you believe what came out of the 2013 Snowden leaks from the NSA, they didn't believe it was hackable at the time. It's anonymized routing and things like that. So on the other end of that dark web, of which at the time in Memex in 2016-17, we estimated to be a size of maybe tens of thousands, max 100,000 pages. On the other end are people running servers on that dark web that use onion routing and have an onion URL. And there are catalogs now. There wasn't at the time. Memex built one of the first catalogs, or the first catalog of the dark web, and the first widely usable one, at least. And so at the time, in sense, what people have used the dark web for, back then, is selling services. Hitmen. Oh, I put up a text file. I'm a hitman. Contact me at this Proton mail address, and then pay for me with cryptocurrency to kill this person or whatever. Or selling organs or selling guns. So it's really sources, and data for journalists and whatever. And so what's happened since in 2017 on and to present, what happens is you're some criminal network, and you got to leak a data, or maybe you're not, or maybe you're just a good, whatever, not a criminal, but you're trying to use it for anonymized ways. You put data or you put information out there, and then people got to find it, on the dark web. And there are now catalogs of it that you can find stuff on. And so, what it represents is possibly a set of sources, or to communicate or to contact anonymized way. And also to, where did the Equifax data go? Well, it's been going onto the dark web. Where did, some of this other data? Now we constantly are informed by Google Chrome, your data was found in a data breach. Where are they getting that information from? The dark web, because they're scraping and they're crawling it. Change your password because it's been in a leak, it's on the dark web. And so things like that.
So is there anything that's captured your attention now that you, in the work that you're doing, like what you've noticed in the dark web and all the background information that you have, like that could be a potential, I wonder if journalists are going to cover something like this? Like, is there a topic that's kind of captured your attention recently?
The thing I could give an advice for that I don't think has been well covered, but is true and is just obvious to looking at it, is the level of sophistication went backwards. Because like I said, everyone, even on the dark web, is running forum sites back in the day, 5 years ago, trying to have these marketplaces. And then they realize those are hackable. So now if you go on that, it's text files. And again, like, it's because you can't hack a text file, right? But you could make a bunch of links or pointers to where you're trying to do your business, pay me in cryptocurrency, contact me on Proton Mail. Well, no one's going to hack that. They could track that down, right. But it's not like you can get hacked because you're running a bulletin board site or something like that. So it's almost like this adaptation, again, it's the arms race in general. It's the tactics adaptation, that's, and so that, that's probably increased the opportunity cost for tracking this stuff down, finding it, and, incurred costs on all ends for people that want to observe it, or people that want to find it, or, use its services.
For sure. Well, usually what we ask our final question to all of our guests, I'm going to ask that to you as well, is what does press freedom mean to you?
So, really, I kind of said it before. So for me, a free and open press speaks truth to power, and and it's absolutely necessary. And also it's a very honorable job. And anyone that follows me on Twitter knows I'm very, balanced. I don't think everyone does it honorably, but I think that, I think certain people do it for clicks and things like that. And I'm a little pissed off and annoyed with that. But I think that really the vast majority of journalists are doing it and putting themselves at risk. They're speaking truth to power. They're doing exactly, at least in the United States, what are enshrined, in our Constitution as, as part of the First Amendment. And they're absolutely critical and necessary. We should help them. We should be supportive of them. And as technologists, actually, I'll selfishly define this, and they're replete with amazing use cases, and for us to help them, and we ought to make their jobs easier. So, and sometimes even rocket scientists can do that. So
amazing. And if anyone wanted to follow your work, where can they find you to follow the work that you're doing with NASA and just in general?
Two sources, more just opinion and opining and tech. I do on Twitter, on Instagram. I do running and kids and tech and AI. So just you can find me at Chris Mattman on Twitter or Instagram, pretty much everywhere. So
perfect. Well, thank you, Chris, for joining us today. And incredible that our paths crossed, and you just so happen to be the person that created the technology behind the Panama Papers. I'm still floored by that.
Hey, and I'm still floored, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, Elle. And look at that amazing space picture in the back with the astronaut, and that wasn't just a little Easter egg. We want to point that out.
Right.
And yeah, no, it's a pleasure to meet you and know you.
Yeah, and thank you all that joined us today. Make sure to, we have our newsletter that goes out every Friday, and we're going to be announcing our next talk next week, which will be with Jessica O'Byrne, the founder of Gymcastic, the #1 podcast for gymnastics. She has worked on an undercover story for the past year and a half or so with a Romanian journalist. And we're hoping to go deeper into that story with her next week. She's also going to the Olympics. So we're hoping to talk to her about all things in collaboration, international collaboration on stories, sports, and obviously gymnastics. And so make sure to sign up for that in our newsletter. We'll also be posting that on our group and on social media. So we hope to see you there as well. Chris, thank you so much. We hope we can have you back. I know, like, I have a million questions for you, and I could talk to you for hours and listen to you for hours. So we hope that we can have you back another time when that time comes.
Be a great pleasure. Thanks, Elle.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week.